You're listening to the IoT Weekly Podcast brought to you by Gearforge Software. Hello and welcome to episode number 10 of the IoT Weekly Podcast brought to you by Gearforge Software. My name is Matthew, and I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Cliff, and our collaborator, Zainab. How are you guys today?
I'm doing just awesome. It's freezing cold outside, but I got to tell you, I'm just having a great day today, Matthew. As always, it's a Friday and just a wonderful day. That sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. How about you, Zainab?
You get used to the cold, and we have cheesecake today, so.
I don't have cheesecake.
I'm on my second cheesecake, Matthew, and these things are delicious.
Amazing things. They're like a mix of meringue and cheesecake. I don't get it, but it's wonderful.
With blackberries on top. Mm.
That sounds wonderful, and now I'm jealous.
Yeah, I didn't mention it to you earlier because I was just worried you'd get jealth.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well, I mentioned it now.
Yes, yeah, and now I'm jealous. So you're right. Mm-hmm. Your predictions were true. So what have you been up to, Cliff?
Well, I think I told you I was starting a Raspberry Pi project with my daughter. Mm-hmm. So we've been working through that slowly, just so that she's involved every step of the way. And then that's it's coming along nicely. We're about to the point where we're ready to start doing a little bit of soldering and a little bit of coding. And then that, of course, with the Raspberry Pi, you have to use Python. So I've been I'm not, as you know, Python's not kind of my core language that I typically play with. So I picked up a book and I've been reading quite a bit of that, just to get myself kind of ramped up and ready for that.
That sounds like an awful lot of fun. And
yes.
Python's a good language to know, for sure.
Yeah, it's the indentation that gets me a little bit, along with the spacing, because I'm so accustomed to brackets and semicolons versus the spacing scenario.
Yeah, if you come from a C-style language, Python is it's a little different to get used to. Some people really hate the white space. I think the fact is it makes Python code look kind of blocky, but it's consistent, right? So basically every Python file you see has to be indented, similarly. So it minimizes code style. I find Python's just a good utility language. It's a good one to learn. I mean, especially for a scripting
it
language.
Seems great for scripting. It reminds me more of JavaScript, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the way Python is taken off, I mean, it's just everywhere now. So. Yeah. Seems like if you're going to learn one, Python is not a bad one. It's actually a good starter language too for your kids and stuff. So that sounds like fun.
Yeah. How about yourself?
So let's see. I have been playing around with message queues and Python specifically.
I love message queues.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So as I've probably talked about, I've been doing some Django development for a variety of clients, and love Django. But speaking of Python, it's just great. It's a great framework. One of the downsides of Django, so I'm used to using Node.js, and basically everything is asynchronous, right? And I tend to think in terms of everything being asynchronous. Django is synchronous, like top to bottom synchronous. And so I've got some cases where I really need to do things offline. I need to just delegate it up to a message queue. So I've been playing around with kind of how you connect all that and what are the best options. And I'm not 100% sure that using Python for this at all is what I've got in mind, but it's been fun to play with.
Yeah. Nice. Zena, how about you?
I'm just realizing I'm surrounded by techies. I mean, if you ask me, I was just working on, after the business concept, I was just working on the vision and mission, trying to learn how to start businesses in Minnesota, really. And I've just been doing a lot of reading for that.
Nice.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot that goes into that. Oh, it's super boring. I agree.
You'll have to forgive us for our techiness. Sometimes we get off in the weeds a little bit.
Oh, no, it's quite enjoyable.
The the goal of the podcast is really, we really want it to be more business focused. So you'll have to just like nudge us when we're off too far into the tech weeds, because Cliff and I tend to do that.
Okay. I can do that, I think.
There you go.
All right. Excellent. So, guys, did we have any feedback this week?
Well, I mean, on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's been actually fun. I think we all remember Casey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Casey's just been wonderfully supportive, and I honestly just really enjoy all the content he shares, and a lot of people. But I mean, other than that, we haven't really gotten feedback on the podcast itself.
Okay.
So.
Well,
yeah.
I always like to say, it doesn't matter to me what the feedback is. I just would love to see the interactions. If you have any questions or comments, or you just want to, share a recipe, we'll be happy to get that.
Definitely.
So what are we at now? We've got some followers on Twitter, I think.
Yes, very exciting. We have almost 200. I was hoping I'd wake up today and find 200, but it's 6 followers short. So
I told Zainab if we had 200 today, we would go get ice cream. But no ice cream.
Oh, no ice cream.
See how I'm very sad about it.
Yep. So sorry.
Well, you do have cheesecake. So did you really need cheesecake and ice cream?
I'm up for ice cream anytime, even when it's -1 outside right now.
Oh man,
the more the merrier.
That's right. Well, we could do this pledge drive style, and see if we could get those last 6 followers while we record the podcast. Maybe we'll check in at the end.
Oh, okay.
I think that's a great idea.
You get the free tote bag.
Get that free IoT button if you follower number 200.
Yes. That's right. That could be kind of fun. So what is our actual contest?
So our actual contest, I said if we hit 150, which we did, and if we hit 200, which we're very, very close to, we'd give out an IoT button. So we are looking to give out an IoT button. We've pinged a few people, so we're just waiting to hear back to see.
Please take these off our hands.
Yes. I've got them sitting on the desk over here. I'd love to give these things away. I'm desperately trying to give these away. I was happy. Trust me, I was so happy earlier this week to ship one out to Casey. So I love that.
That is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So additionally, so if you are interested in one of these, well, even if you're not interested, just follow us.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to lose? But if you're interested in one of these buttons, if you follow us, you'll be put in the running, right? For a giveaway.
Correct.
Yes. And if you boost our tweets by retweeting them, we'll put your name in some extra.
Yep.
So it's
a big
little extra bonus.
Our hat keeps getting bigger, which is awesome.
Yes. Are we using a literal hat?
I don't know. That's a great question.
It seems like go ahead.
I've been thinking about it. I've been using my beanie lately, but I might actually get an actual hat.
I think like a bowler would be good. I really like bowlers. I mean, I could even try wearing it once in a while.
Yeah. I think that would be great.
Or like an Indiana Jones type hat.
It seems like as a technical podcast, we could probably find a technical hat.
Oh, yes.
That could do this.
I've read about a few of these.
Yeah.
They have LEDs included. I think I could find
Does it ring a bell when
if you wanted to? I'm sure we could do a lot of stuff with this thing.
What we could do...
It might be so heavy you can't actually wear it. Could be a problem.
Yeah. You could have sort of a physical hat. And then, when you draw it, it like automatically tweets or something.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
That'd be useful. If you do get something like that, I will put a picture of it on Twitter. I'll make sure to do that.
Well,
that would be...
I will let you know.
Probably more work than it's worth, but
yes,
be awfully good conversation starter.
It'd be pretty funny.
So, if you're interested in following us, our handle on Twitter is Gearforge IoT. Look, I remembered it this time.
Good job, Matthew.
Well, it's like the least. It's like the absolute minimum of my job. But if you're not fond of Twitter, you can also get in touch with us by sending us an email.
Mhm.
That is an electronic mail format.
Yes.
And you can send that to podcast@gearforgesoftware.com. So please, as I've said, get in touch, even if it's just sending us a recipe.
Exactly.
So, Cliff.
Yes, Matthew?
Would you like to share some information about our sponsor this week?
I would love to. So our sponsor this week is Gearforge Software.
Wait a minute.
Oh, wait, go ahead.
Didn't they sponsor last week's episode?
It definitely was not IBM last week, I can tell you that.
No, it wasn't. It also was not Budweiser.
No, Dilly Dilly, right? That's not how it goes this year. It's Dilly Dilly.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I've watched some commercials during the last football
see,
game.
we were just talking about that. I don't watch commercials.
Neither one of us actually have cable TV or regular TV, so we don't see any commercials. But I do like football, and of course the Vikings got stomped last week, so I got to understand what people were talking about at a New Year's party when they're talking about Dilly Dilly. So
there you go.
Yes. So yes, actually Gearforge was the sponsor last week. Very kind of them. And they're the sponsor this week. So pretty exciting there also. And we may have a new sponsor coming up here in the next few weeks.
That's awesome.
Yep. So a bit of a cliffhanger there. So Gearforge Software was founded to focus on and develop the Internet of Things technology and create custom IoT solutions. There's so many things to consider when you're trying to develop a new idea. You've got the hardware, the software, and connecting all of it to a cloud. And then you got the fun part of it of just trying to figure out your marketing and pricing strategy. And in many cases, what you need are some techie advisors to help guide you through the wild west of this new digital frontier. With 2 IoT labs that are still expanding, Gearforge can bring any prototype to life. And you can learn more at gearforgesoftware.com.
And I don't think we're letting any secrets out that we both work for Gearforge Software.
Oh, I was really trying to keep that a secret, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to do with it, though.
Gosh. No, there you go. Oh, gosh.
All right. So that's wonderful, and thank you to Gearforge for sponsoring the podcast.
Yes.
All right, so it's time for some news. What do we have coming up today? We've got a whole range.
We've got a lot. And then I think this first one we're going to hand over to you, just because I know how much you love security, Matthew. And I think this is really, really interesting. Do you want to take this first story?
You got it. If it says botnet, I'm immediately interested.
I know. I thought and especially for the price.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's budget priced DDoSs. So
for college students.
That's right. Yeah. So this article comes to us from Ars Technica, written by Dan Gooded, and it is basically there is a website that's popped up that is offering DDoS attacks. So that's distributed denial of service attacks for starting at just $20 per target. And if you visit the link in the show notes, you can see the screenshot of the site, and it looks like like any going to purchase some software or something, and it's got like 3 tiers, and you can choose this level or that level, and it's like a whole professional outfit here. Crazy. And what they're selling is basically illegal denial of service attacks, and we're talking about $20 for like a 300 gigabits per second attack, which is not, it's huge actually, but it's not huge compared to the biggest of the big, but it's still enough to basically take any normal person's server offline for sure. So if your business is not like Google, you might be in trouble because of this.
The interesting thing, and maybe I don't speak Spanish, but they're calling itself Los Calvos de San Davichi.
Wait a minute, you don't speak Spanish?
No, I realize. I realize that came out really well. So I plugged that into Google because I'm like, Google, what does this actually mean? So I plugged that in, and can you guess what the English translation was in Google?
the calves of Saint Calvin?
No. Google tells me, and so anybody that actually speaks Spanish, so Google tells me it's the baldy sand baldness.
Oh, that's great.
Oh my gosh.
I love it.
Sorry, I was
What
really
the
curious
heck?
what that actually meant.
So it probably is worth for the audience, if you're maybe not, like I said, we're aiming at maybe more business oriented. If you're not technical, distributed denial of service, basically what's happening behind the scenes is these botnets are exploiting a vulnerability in an IoT device, and then using their network capability. So basically you get a bunch of these, you get like a whole army of these IoT devices, all of which have been compromised through this exploit. And then you basically tell all of your army of devices to start attacking a particular server on the web. And because it's distributed with all those devices, it's really hard to protect against. You can't just say stop accepting requests from this IP address because you have maybe millions of IP addresses. And it's enough requests to flood the server and stop it from doing anything useful. So that's kind of what's going on at a high level. And in particular, they are leveraging specific vulnerabilities in specific hardware, which is brought up in the article, to do this, and they're basically selling the result, right?
That's just crazy to me.
It is crazy.
It's kind of strange because not only have they very quickly upgraded it from, I think it was 100 gigabytes per second. Now it's like at 300. And what was I trying to say here? Shoot, I lost my train of thought.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Don't worry.
I'll probably go back with that. I'll jump in later.
Yeah, all right.
That's
so,
okay.
We talked about this a few weeks ago, just the general principle of what's the future of this kind of thing, because the problem is these devices are out there, they're insecure. Once a vulnerability is found, it can be exploited, and it's very difficult to patch these devices because as the manufacturer either doesn't care or has no way of doing it without the user actually taking some action, right? Yep. And so what's going to happen, right? Because as like the internet cannot afford for these kind of attacks to be so cheap. Basically anybody, if they don't like your message, your brand, whatever it is, now you can pay $20 and have that brand taken off the internet essentially because your server is under attack.
Absolutely crazy.
Yes, totally bizarre. And I feel like that's unsustainable. Like something's got to give, right?
There, I remembered. I was trying to say that in the article at least it mentions that they will actually do the attack for you, but at the same time they're trying to promote some kind of like hosting service that says, hey, we won't let that happen to you if you kind of work with us. And so it's just really weird. Yeah. It's like they're putting it out on a budget so that they can kind of get you to join their hosting service.
I'll tell you what, it's pretty gutsy to try to sell DDoS attacks and then on the other hand try to sell a service that claims to be DDoS proof.
Yeah,
don't you think you would become you'd become a target?
Yeah, it reminds me a story a long time ago about a security individual that was boasting about Anonymous, and Anonymous came back and really nailed him pretty hard.
Totally.
Totally got him.
Totally.
Like, what are you doing, you idiot?
Well, here's the reality with anything related to security and software and the internet is basically nothing is ultimately secure, right?
No.
If you follow the best practices and are smart about it, you can slow down an intruder, perhaps to the point where you're just not going to be, it just doesn't make any sense for them to attack you. So they're going to go after low-hanging fruit, right? But I always think it's amusing when people are like, yeah, this is 100%. There's no way, it's like, well, you better
Never do
really
the
be sure.
Talk to your lawyer first
really
and then decide if you should put that out there.
Yeah, exactly. So. All right. Well, so Cliff, I know that asset tracking is one of your favorite topics. Do you want to talk about this next article?
I'd love to. So it's really interesting. Of course, I love this type of stuff. Delta launches high-tech luggage labels on Heathrow flights that allow you to track the exact location of your bags from your phone. And what does that actually mean? They're actually having RFID microchips. It's like a $50 million project that are embedded in the luggage labels that enable passengers using the airline's app and track the luggage onto the plane and onto the luggage carousel at the other end. So as the bags pass through the airport and are loaded on the aircraft, antenna placed at various points along the journey read the luggage labels and transmit their location data. Then passengers can use their phones to log into, of course, the airline's app, where they can see a map of exactly where their bags are. And they can also set push notifications to tell them when their bags have been loaded on the aircraft and which carousel they should go into to collect the luggage when they get to their destination. I think it's awesome. And as a person that's had their bags lost a few times, not by Delta, this is actually pretty amazing to me, just for that whole standpoint.
You lost them yourself, didn't you?
I may have. Yes.
I mean, this makes so much sense.
It does.
It's sort of mind-boggling that, it just makes so much sense. One of the things I was thinking about, though, was not just the convenience of it, right?
Yep.
It's the security of it.
Entirely.
I always wonder about this. Like, well, it seems, the whole process seems kind of sloppy to me,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it would be really nice. You always hear those messages in the airports that say things like, if you see an unattended bag, let somebody know. Right?
Yep.
Well, how amazing would it be if you could just see on a map
yeah,
where your bags were, I would think from a security standpoint, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I think even having a more personalized scenario where you could actually, I know they have these already as far as like RFIDs on a personal standpoint, but I absolutely love this. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for asset tracking and using the right tech for this, especially since they've got these RFIDs so small. I remember talking before about those, the LoRa nano tags that they had coming out here, should be this first quarter from SimTech this year. But those are going to be small enough to actually build into clothing and things like that. So, I mean, just the concept of being able to use these tags and the fact that they've gotten to the price point now where essentially you throw them away, right? You're not going to reuse a baggage tag. I assume the hard part is just getting all the sensors that read these things set up and kind of the app and everything else. But I just think this is absolutely huge, and I can easily see this getting, I'm guessing Heathrow is probably the first prototype, but then it'll roll out from there.
Well, it makes sense. Also, I mean, it's probably a longer, higher priced flight, so kind of makes sense.
Totally makes sense. I mean, think about it. It's like, yep, you hop on your plane, it shows up in Heathrow just a little bit late, and then you've got to catch on a carry-on flight. And the biggest thing I worry about is my luggage. Like, did it actually keep up with this? I mean, that's totally a huge scenario. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, it's on board. Take that off my anxiety list.
You just think about it. It's like, I mean, just so many steps in that process. Like when the luggage is being offloaded.
Yep.
It's just so sloppy, right? Because everybody's just standing around the carousel waiting for their bag, and then you grab the bag, and it's like, oh, that's not mine.
Oh yes.
It's just so sloppy.
It is.
And this, I just love the idea of being
and
able
people
to
put the duct tape or the special bands around it and everything else so that you know which bag is yours.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is like, oh look, mine just came out the carousel. I'm gonna go grab a coffee first. Yep, there it is.
Exactly.
You're the one guy that walks up with your phone and be like, I got this.
Really, what it should be is it like you have a sensor attached to you, and the luggage has a little little motors, and it finds you. You just go get coffee and it like it just wheels itself over to you.
Hey, there you are. I was curious where you're all this time.
Imagine all the mess.
Oh, yeah.
Like luggage bumping into it.
You try to go down the hallway and there's just like a horde of luggage coming your way.
You gotta, at that point you've got like a luggage lane, for God's sakes. Come on.
Yeah. Give it a moment, let it go down the stairs.
Yes.
I love it. That's fun.
Yeah, so I love this. Concrete example of some great asset tracking going on here, using the very tiny little tags. And again, I see this spreading. I'd put a bet we're going to see other airlines doing this too, if not broader.
Oh, I'm sure this is just what it's going to be soon.
Yep.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but aren't they already being, like RFID, aren't they already being used in some clothing companies to kind of track where your clothes goes, and then you cut off the tag?
Essentially, yeah. Some of them do have that. I don't know which brands, but I do know what you're talking about.
Well, you might be thinking about the security tags, right? Is that what you're thinking of?
They're like these chunky tags that you find that you're supposed to cut off as soon as you buy your item, basically. But no one does it. Yeah.
So and basically those are detected by the scanners that are at the door. They're pretty crude though. We used to use that. We used to use that at Barnes and Noble.
On the retail side, that's actually one of the big areas that they're really interested in, is if they can get more data about their users. Specifically, they would love that information, just to be able to, because based off of that, they could give customizable experiences for each one of their brands that the user interacts with.
Yep, it's getting creepy now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want it.
Very creepy.
I tell you though, I mean, I just cannot say enough about how privacy is going to be a huge issue with all of this technology.
Yep.
It is just, I mean, I don't even think we've really started having the conversation yet. But
well, I think we got at least one story that we could start here shortly talking about privacy concerns.
Yeah, we do.
And not in the kindergarten fashion either, so we got to be careful. Or teenage fashion, I should say.
Okay. So, Zainab,
yes.
What has Amazon recently been up to?
Oh, Amazon has been in some very sketchy affairs lately. Not everyone's happy about it because they've been patenting wristbands to detect your emotions and to monitor your performance when you're working with them.
No, and you're talking about their employees.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this, I mean, that was what stood out for me for sure. This is apparently, it's a patent, so that doesn't mean anything.
Correct.
But they have patented these wristbands that basically it sounds like they are going to track the employees' movements and their like what they're doing with their hands. They can track how efficient the employee is through that, and apparently it also gives some kind of feedback to, I don't know, like guide them to the right product or something.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what it basically does is, well, as you kind of move with the wristband on you, they can track, like, see if you move your hands a certain way, then you probably picked up an item, you put it somewhere, we can detect based off of your movement where you put it. And so you don't have to kind of put in any more effort to kind of show us what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so it's supposed to save you a lot of time, a lot of effort so that you can work around. And at the same time, they get all this information they can process to see how they can make everything even more efficient, because they can tell where some weaknesses might be.
So here's the interesting thing I think is really intriguing about this. I think you've got some privacy concerns, and I think you've got to be careful about how this is leveraged, specifically around performance of individuals, right? Because I think there's more. You could say, yep, these 25 employees are in the top 15 percentile of all our folks, so we should give them higher raises than the rest. But what I find interesting is I've talked to folks that actually have worked in factories, right? And their job is fulfillment. right? So this really sounds like it's fulfillment to me in this case here. And what I've heard though, in some of these little more antiquated scenarios, they'll get a ticket off the printer, and if they look at it and be like, oh, I don't like that one, they'll just kind of slip it to the side and grab the next one. Well, what happens then is sometimes you end up with one or two individuals that just get the easy tickets per se. Other ones will end up with the harder ones. And I think this would demonstrate then potentially kind of some of that information back to even management to be able to make it a little bit not so much fair, but to balance things out. And maybe you could even cater to individuals that are better sorted for one job versus the other once you start looking at the data.
Yeah, it's interesting. So John Hodgman likes to call the Fitbit style, wearables, dystopia bands.
Sure.
Which is just what I call them now. My wife and I just call them dystopia bands because we think that's so funny. I feel like this is the next logical step in the dystopia band, right? It's like, it's pretty invasive, really.
Entirely.
Right? However, here's the reality. So, from somebody who used to manage workers doing this kind of process, we did track this data, right? It's just, it was super crude and inaccurate. And I think this isn't any different from what businesses are already doing. It's just that they're doing it badly now. And I think your point, Cliff, is probably exactly right on, that all of a sudden, people who've gotten away with stuff for ages, they look like a great employee, but it's because they're cutting all the corners. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You might be able to detect that now, and you can start to see, well, this is the person who doesn't do any work and just wanders around.
Well, and think about it. One of the things you've said many a times, Matthew, is once you start measuring that and making it so much transparent, just by measuring something, you can change behavior.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I wish that were true for my own calorie intake.
I struggle right there with you. I should have had two of these tarts or whatever these things are called already.
You said they were cheesecake.
I don't know what they are, but they're delicious.
They're like a mutant of some sort. They're a good mutant.
To play devil's advocate here, so I think managers are going to like this kind of technology. I do think this could be there could be some really serious negative consequences here. I mean, because what you monitor does change behavior. And if you now suddenly you can drive everything through this really quantifiable, data driven way, right? And you mentioned you're tying raises to that. And so being human beings, we're very creative. And we're going to find ways to sort of game that system too.
Oh, of course.
Right? Just like people game the system now. And I think there's sort of pros and cons here, but you can also see how that could lead you towards this direction of where everything is always about increasing productivity, which is only a fraction of what it takes to have a really successful business or anything, happy people, right?
What I wonder about though, Matthew, knowing Amazon, I mean, what if this is more of a way to create models to be able to eventually train the robots how to do this work?
Well, I was wondering that as well.
Because
it's
you need data to be able to gather to start this. How are you going to get that data?
I was just going to say, not that, but I was going to say it doesn't really matter because in 10 years, they're going to replace all these folks with robots anyway. We should really have a discussion on one of these episodes about what are we thinking in terms of automation, right? Because the wave of automation is already here.
But I mean, if you think about let's say your first wave of automation is really the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, and you say, oh, we're gonna save this other stuff because it's more complex for humans. But if you could actually then create models based off of these wristbands and actually then automate even that, I mean, that just takes it to the next level, right?
But what are the displaced workers going to do?
I don't know. That's a whole other conversation.
That's the conversation I want to have.
Yeah.
Sometime we should do that. We should have that as a topic, because we talked briefly about the wave of sort of automated trucks, right? That are coming.
Mm-hmm.
Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, talks in his book about how he sees this future. He says it's absolutely going to happen, but depending on who you talk to, some people say it's going to be a disaster of because there's going to be a lot of people put out of work. And he sees it differently because he's trying to lead a company into the future. And he says, it's about trying to help the humans do what the humans do well, while assisting them with computers, essentially. Yep. I'd love to have that. I think we should have that conversation, though.
After you read Ready Player One. You've got to read that first. I'm telling you. I don't know why you haven't read that darn book yet, but only after that.
I mean,
you can't watch the movie first, for God's sakes. Come on.
I have tried to keep this a secret, but I can't read.
Oh, and he's married to a librarian. She felt pity on him.
Yeah, she will kill me for having said that. So
I can't wait to be like, you need to, Amanda, listen up to about 35 minutes into the podcast. I want you to listen to that chunk, okay?
Exactly. I promise you I will read Ready Player One.
To jump in here. Sorry, please go on.
No, go ahead. Somebody should cut us off.
Yes. Oh my. Okay, to jump in here. I just what I notice is there's a lot of talk about controlling the workers and making sure the workers are doing well, and feeling like just kind of this the basis of lack of trust with workers. But what I kind of see it is more around inventory, increasing efficiency, and understanding the patterns of behaviors of workers, making sure you can work around some things rather than trying to control them, trying to guide them around, and just making sure they get no breath. Because I feel like the number one fear, and why some people are very upset about this, is they think they're trying to turn the worker into a robot.
Sure.
Well, I just see it more around, let me make your work easier. You can increase efficiency, and you don't have to do some of the tasks that you had to do before.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's really astute, and I think there are, so just for example, if there's an item that is constantly being sought, it might not even be one of the things they're packing. Maybe it's just where the label maker is. You know what I mean? If they discover that the average worker in this particular unit has to take 50 steps to get to it, right? And that by installing an additional one, they could save 50,000 steps a year or something, right? Whatever it is per unit. I mean, that could be huge. So I think that's a smart comment.
Yep, I agree.
And in this next section, we're going to talk about an adult massager. So if you have kids in the car, you may want to mute. Well, do we want to talk about dildos?
I think we should.
I think it's about time. I mean, it's February.
We have been building up to this moment.
Yes, nicely done, Matthew. And this is our second time, don't get us wrong, about talking about dildos. So this is the second time.
Sorry, everyone.
This is my first time.
Okay, that's all right.
So I'm so culturally shaken right now.
Thank you for bearing with us.
Yes. Well, I added this story. I really think it's interesting, specifically, of course, from a pure security standpoint.
100%.
Yes. So
this is purely professional.
Yep. And I came across this story this morning. It came off of Mashable by Jack Morse, published today, February 2nd. And I actually thought we had talked about a personal whatever before, the dildo. And that one had some issues before. If you remember, do you remember correctly, Matthew?
Yeah, it was recording some private audio, I think.
Yeah. It was recording audio, and it was available to be able. It could easily get hacked. Well, this one here, a little bit different. So the interesting scenario for this one is that it allows you to remotely control the dildo. So I realized in my head, I was like, why would you want to do that? I'm sure there's reasons for this. And if I'm that naive, then please go ahead and say that. But you can send an invite to somebody else through an app to remotely control this thing.
Sure.
And one of the issues that they noticed right away is that they used a counter specifically to create that ID. And the issue with using a counter is even if you unless you increase it by 3 or some sort of number, you can randomly select all of those counters, and now all of a sudden you can basically control all the dildos that are out there.
Yeah, integer primary keys when exposed on sort of boundaries, so API boundaries, let's say, are a primary form, like vector for attack, basically.
It's just ridiculous. I've seen this in other occasions.
I have seen it in production.
Yep.
And had to try to mitigate for that.
Like just use a GUID, for God's sake.
Use a GUID. It's your friend.
GUIDs are good. And so from that standpoint, our friends from a security firm, SEC Consult, ended up taking a deeper look into this thing. And what they found was that the administrative interfaces could become exposed. So a hacker essentially could have access to everything. Real name, home address, passwords, it's all in clear text, and your image galleries.
Well, that's special. I just want to mention how many little jokes and asides I have skipped over as you've described all of this.
I have tried to keep it above my 17-year-old self here and try to be very much clean here on this one.
So this really is, I'm on the disclosure list right now, and it really is just pretty amazing, honestly.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Exposed administrative interfaces on the internet, a clear text storage of passwords, unauthenticated Bluetooth LE connections, insufficient authentication mechanism, insecure direct object reference, missing authentication and remote control, reflected cross-site scripting. Like, this is a laundry list. Like, that's pretty much everything.
It's just everything. Everything here is just, I mean, it's like they didn't even, I don't know who did their coding for them, but it was not good.
Well, here's the thing. Are you ready? Are you ready for the thing?
I'm ready.
So a lot of these companies, when, and we've seen this firsthand, Cliff, when they are creating a device, they are focused on the device. The fact that it connects to the cloud or, connects to anything is often sort of secondary, right? It's like, oh yeah, and we also need an app. The people who, and then that's when that's not your focus, right? Your focus is the device. This is when this stuff comes in. You've got to, there's just as much, maybe more due diligence required for connecting something. Anytime something connects to a network, you have just exposed yourself, right? Oh God, there it is again. So I think, I think that's what I see is, hey, we're a hardware company. Well, you're not anymore. You're now creating essentially software. And in this case, it's really invasive.
Extremely invasive. It's just kind of crazy. Literally, I could get to any user picture just through their website, for God's sakes. This is horrible.
Yeah, it's really bad.
I cannot believe this.
What is the device? We should let people know.
What is the device name? Do you have it?
May I do this one?
Yes.
Okay.
I've been practicing this. It's called the Vibratissimo Pentabuster.
Well done. Well done.
Oh, God.
I'm very proud of myself.
That's very great.
Yeah. If I can find out on Amazon, maybe I'll put it up on our Amazon page, but don't think that this will probably...
Oh, my Lord.
Amazon.
We don't want to sell any of these, though.
No,
we actually want people not to buy these.
Correct. And it looks like they are trying to fix some of these. I've went to a few pages, and now it says, oops, you just blew up the internet. Not true. That's,
I'm just thinking, honestly, they're probably going to fix this as time goes on. I mean, there are articles everywhere, and people are speaking up about it. And if they want to stay in business, they're going to have to. But it's just the realization that people want privacy and people care a lot about their personal lives now more than ever, and it can't be a secondary concern anymore. They need to realize that it's like it should be up there on the list.
So here's the real question too then, beyond kind of expecting the company, what's the expectation of the user? I mean, are there expectations of the user from a privacy standpoint, you think? Like, I understand that?
Well, so here's my 2 cents on that. I think today users are more comfortable sharing than they ever have been, but they want control, right? They want control, and they want to understand where, like, the worst thing to me is when I'm using a service and I don't know what it's doing with my data, right?
But here's my question: is I pick up, so I've got some vegetable dip next to me, and I look on the back, and I can see all of the nutrition facts that are available right here. I mean, how different is a kind of a label per se for these devices to show you what data they store, or in a very simple fashion, not in the terms
of privacy policy.
Oh God, if you're reading through one of those things, it's ridiculous.
We did trivia this week on one of the morning stand-ups, and it was how many days per year would it take the average internet user to read all of the terms and conditions and privacy policies that they've accepted for the services they use? And the answer was 79 days per year.
Just ridiculous.
It is crazy. Yeah, something simple. So like a nutritional label that says, here's what we're doing with your data. I mean, I think that's great. But very first thing is, we got to address these very basic fundamental security holes.
Totally agree with that.
Because they can say whatever they want in their privacy policy, but if they are not protecting the data, then it's completely useless, right?
Yep. Totally agree. All right.
Oh, fun. So.
Yep.
More security?
Back to security. Yep. You want to take this one, Matthew?
I do. I really want to take this one. So the question is, how secure are your light bulbs? This is a blog post by Owen Williams, and this is from January 31st. Basically, the article describes the author's his experiments with the Philips Hue light bulbs. He basically discovered through this really arduous process that these things have an API, and basically here's what it comes down to. His light bulbs weren't doing what he thought they should do. In this specific case, he had a light bulb. He wanted it to turn on in the morning so that it would wake him up, basically. And it was turning on, and then it was immediately dimming, and he couldn't figure out why.
And so he just borrow my dog.
They do. They're a perfect wake up call, aren't they?
Yes.
So he says, basically, he started trying to dig in and figure out what was doing the dimming. And he says, and I'm quoting here, "As it turns out, there isn't a way to see the apps you've authenticated to your lights. Over the space of 2 years, I had authenticated countless different apps and forgotten about them. But Hue has no way to surface these. How the hell could I deauthorize something that broke or worse, got hacked?"
That's just crazy.
Yeah, so basically,
there's no, developer console that you can go into to show all the authorized apps. Then is what you're saying,
right? So there is an embedded web server, apparently the Philips Bridge,
sure,
whatever, right? So he was digging around and he found there's an API, and he could make REST requests to do this. And he says this, quite seriously, is the only way to figure out what and who is authorized to control your Hue. If something rogue is integrated, tough shit if you don't know how to use an API, because you'll never find it.
That's so crazy.
Again, if you're a developer,
I really wonder how well this thing is documented too.
Well, it sounds like he dug around on forums and stuff and figured this out. So I don't think it was in official documentation.
Sure.
So he discovered that one of the apps he uses regularly, which is Flux. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
I actually used it on Mac and Windows until recently. So what it does is it basically changes the hue of your screen. So during the day, it will be more blue tones, and at night, it basically goes to more orange tones.
Yep.
And that's supposed to be better to help, your circadian rhythms and whatever. And in my particular case, my eyes are sensitive to blue light.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to set my screens are always set to an orange hue.
Sure.
It's also supposed to help you sleep. Because blue light will keep you awake. So if you are on screens toward the end of the day, you're supposed to have it set to orange, right? What's interesting is Mac has recently built this into the OS, so you don't need an external app. It was actually part of the latest update, and Windows has too. It's in Windows 10 now with the creators update in the fall. So just a little aside. But anyway, this is what Flux did, and it's a great app. It's a really cool thing. But basically, apparently, it also integrates with these Philips Hue light bulbs. So he had gone in, he had actually connected these to his bulbs to Flux on his Mac at some point, and then forgotten about it. And so he found out that it was Flux. Basically, he would set the light to do what it was supposed to do, and then Flux would take over and then dim it, right? And he had no idea it was even happening or what was causing it. So he says, in conclusion, what I noticed this week is that while Philips Hue is a great system, the security model it uses is weird at best, and I found out in the most confusing way, I lost control of my lights.
That's just crazy. That is so wild.
Yeah, I loved this story, and it's definitely worth, it just takes a few minutes to read it. It's definitely worth the read. So
that's just wild.
I think if I were going to say a couple of comments here on this one, so this is what we keep talking. So Philips is a huge company, right? It's not some fly-by-night operation. It is that this stuff has not, like, we haven't figured this stuff out yet.
No, it's still, just like we said before, it still is very much the Wild West from the standpoint of devices and everything else. The hard part is this stuff's going to be out there for a while, or at least till the light bulb burns out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you think about, I mean, absolutely, if you're going to allow apps to connect to this stuff, you've got to have a way to manage it.
Yep.
You gotta. It's crazy.
All right. I think we've got one left. Is that right?
What is it?
All right. Zena, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to take it?
Oh, I think we can. I think we can do this together.
All right, you go for it, and I'll join in.
Oh, okay. So this is very interesting because Tetra Science developed an IoT platform from R&D.
Okay.
And they managed to kind of connect all of the different equipment in a normal lab, your everyday average lab, to get information. I feel like that is just really great for accelerating R&D.
Mm-hmm. I could see how this would be really interesting because I presume, and maybe I'm wrong, but that having very precise readings and settings and replications of your equipment is critical from an R&D standpoint, right? And I've got to believe even just simplifying the understanding kind of, all right, I'm going to be working on this. I need my microscope set at X, and what other equipment they use to be able to reproduce this would be so much simpler if you're able to push this up and you've got all that information from that standpoint. So I think that's really interesting because right now my understanding is that labs can't communicate to each other in a consistent standard.
Mm-hmm. And so what they have is this just tying everything through the cloud, and suddenly instead of you having to put everything in manually and all the time and all the effort, they can talk to each other and just imagine where you could take all that information.
Yeah, that's huge.
It makes things just so much easier.
So do these things already talk to some kind of back-end system?
It sounds like so my understanding is they didn't have a consistent mechanism for all of them talking together. It doesn't sound like they all had, reading the article, it looks like there's a lot of siloed data sets created, basically.
Sure.
And humans had to manually copy and paste it or write it down to go from one to the other. So what their goal was, it looks like here, was to be able to kind of have a standard so they can all then talk together under one scenario.
Yeah, I mean, a standard, I think, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're doing R&D and then you're going to try to build off of somebody else's process. I can only imagine the extra time it would take to do that. Here's an interesting scenario. It says, as an example, this lab, so an outside lab technician tripped over a power cord and failed to notice they had unplugged an incubator, and bioengineer Wynn was immediately notified by the IoT platform via email and text that there's a critical change in the incubator's environmental conditions. So what he said was like, hey, if we hadn't caught that the incubator had been unplugged, the entire screen would have failed due to the sample being compromised. And
Sure.
it could essentially it directly compromises their research from that standpoint. And he said that live patient samples are so precious that they can't just go back to the oncologist and ask for more.
Nope, absolutely.
So it's a really big deal. I mean, sounds like they're trying to, just from the failure standpoint, but it sounds like it goes even beyond that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking from a business standpoint, how many types of businesses can use this, and it's not just the pharmacies, it's not just the labs to make sure that everything is working properly and everything is safe, but just thinking anywhere where it's critical to have, for example, like safety or food or something like that, to make sure everything is working properly, can just make the tracking process so much easier.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. And that makes sense. And I could see that even in some potential hazardous environments and things like that, where this would be really beneficial.
And I have it would be interesting to see how this all evolves, because I have a hunch that each of these devices is so different. The data is so different, and they probably all have their own custom way of handling it.
Yep.
I bet it is just a nightmare to try to, like, for this company to try to make any sense of that,
Oh, guaranteed. I mean, you're going to spend more time mapping the data, if anything.
All definitely.
Yep, data mapping. I mean, I felt like at a certain point, that's half the time all you do is just map data.
I feel like that's an awful lot of software.
Yes.
Mapping.
Yes.
Mapping the data.
All right. Do we have any other stories, or is that it for the week?
I think that wraps us up.
Awesome.
So, as always, a reminder, if you have any feedback, shoot us a message at podcast@gearforgesoftware.com or on Twitter at GearforgeIoT. We'd love to hear from you.
Nicely done, Matthew.
Thank you. I remembered it.
Yep. Good job.
Yeah.
Well, so that just about wraps things up. Do you guys have anything fun planned for the weekend? Sinem, how about you?
I am planning my spring break vacation.
Hey, that's great. Are you going to do something fun?
I'm planning to go to Washington, D.C. because I'm such a history nerd.
Awesome.
Great spot.
Yeah, there's so many museums. It's going to be great.
That's great. Have you visited Boston yet?
No.
One of your breaks, you should go to Boston. If you love history, it is great. My wife and I lived there for 5 or 6 years, and it is just packed with things to see all around Boston too.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna be fun.
That's a great city.
Yeah, and well, enjoy DC.
Thank you.
Cliff, what about you?
Well, I'd like to try to get that doorbell project. Again, I'm kind of going at my daughter's pace, so we'll continue to work on that one. And
this is the one where you press the doorbell and it drops you into a pit.
Exactly, the pit of misery. That's
good.
The hard part is digging the multiple pits that we're going to need. I think
well, the ground is frozen right now. So.
Yeah. So it's really tough, but I think we've got a solution figured out here.
Cool.
It involves lots of those flamethrowers from Boring Company.
They're sold out though. Good luck finding those.
Yes, we may have bought a few. I can't say if we did or didn't. Just similar to getting crazy with the IoT buttons, but I'm not going to say either way at this point.
Interesting.
Nope. So I'm going to work on the doorbell project and then probably do a little more Battlefront and then maybe some Fortnite with my son this weekend.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Zainab, what about you? Oh,
she's planning her spring break.
Yeah. Well,
we already covered that. Yep. All right. Well, I guess it's me. So yes. I am probably going to mess around with some message queue stuff this weekend. And no doubt I will be playing some Battlefront, hopefully with you, Cliff.
I hope so too. Any predictions for the Super Bowl this weekend?
Who's playing?
Yeah, I figured that was going to be the question.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
We'll just leave it at that point right there then.
If I have any prediction, there will be a lot of pizza ordered.
Yeah.
with pineapples.
Yum.
That sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I predict someone will win the Super Bowl.
Someone's going to win.
Yeah.
Check.
Someone will lose.
Yes.
It seems like a safe bet.
I think you're spot on with that.
All right. Well, folks, that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us again for next week's show. Until then, so long and be well.
Take care.